You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. I'm excited to welcome back to the program Yuri Felshtinsky, a prominent author, historian, and journalist who's an expert on Russia and the former Soviet Union, has been featured in hundreds of print, TV, and radio interviews worldwide. But I think one of the things that Yuri perhaps is most known to most publics these days is for writing a book with Alexander Litvinenko, who was, former KGB agent, if there's such a thing as a former, and he paid for his revelations with his life when he was poisoned in London with a tea that contained some nuclear substance. So I think that those gruesome pictures were all over the world and seen by most, and sometimes a picture tells a better story than a long book. Yuri, with that long introduction, welcome back.
Thank you.
I think that what most people seem to want to know these days and understand is what is the relationship between Russia and America when it comes to trying to influence American elections. You have obviously experience of working with somebody from KGB at a very high level as far as the level of understanding and information. So what do you think is going on here?
Well, this is a story which is just starting to develop, and this is a story with which we are going to live for a very, very long time. Prior to elections, of course, there was a suspicion based on information received by several American intelligence services that Russia is trying to influence elections on behalf of Trump, mainly through breaking into computer of the Democratic National Committee and releasing through WikiLeaks information damaging. It's questionable how much damaging, but definitely damaging to the Democratic Party. In other words, Russia was helping Trump to win over Clinton. This was not the only piece of information. For those who, like you and like me, speak Russian and have a chance to follow Russian TV broadcasts, both in Russia and outside Russia, we knew from the very beginning that Russia is supporting Trump over Clinton. When we say Russia and Russian media, we have to understand that Russian media by now is, for all practical purposes, when it relates to politics, belongs to the Russian government, that it's heavily controlled, that it's heavily censorship. And Russian channels which were broadcasting in Russian, as well as Russian channel Russia Today, which was broadcasting abroad in English, were definitely helping Mr. Trump to become president as much as they could or understand. At the same time, Russia was involved, and this was very unprecedented, with organizing an interview of Mr. Assange, who is, of course, behind the WikiLeaks reports and releases of emails. There was an interview given by Assange to Russia Today just prior to elections, and this by itself was very unprecedented as well. So from any corner, we knew that the information was coming that Russia is helping Trump. At the same time, Mr. Trump refused to criticize both Russian politics and Russia's behavior, and personally Mr. Putin. I have to say this was kind of damaging for his campaign, because this question was asked repeatedly, what Trump is thinking about Putin or contemporary Russia, and he definitely refused to criticize Putin, which once again I think was damaging for his campaign, because it would be to great advantage of Trump to criticize Putin and Obama's policy towards Russia, because one approach would be, of course, that this was weak policy of the State Department under Obama, and even weak military policy, which led to occupation of Crimea, which led to Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine, which led to Russian intervention into Syria. So other candidates probably would use these mistakes, obvious mistakes, or obvious weak points of Obama's presidency towards his advantage. Trump never used these moments to increase his attacks against Clinton or against Democratic Party or against Obama, and once again defended Putin as much as he could, both before and after the election, which is even more interesting, because prior to elections, you could claim that this was a part of, rhetorical campaign. You have to win elections. All tools are good for this. You do not really care whether you are saying truth or whether you are lying, as long as this helps you to win. But he already won, and unfortunately, we see that this does not change anything. We see that the first appointment, one of the first appointments at least, was the appointment of General Flynn, who is now a national security for Mr. Trump, who is well known as a very pro-Russian general, which is a rare case. You will not be able to find too many pro-Russian generals in the United States Army, because Russia is, recognized as strategic enemy of the United States, not as a friend. Then now, of course, later, of course, we were all together, invited to watch this discussion, who is going to be Secretary of State, Mr. Giuliani or Mr. Romney. Both of them were known as people who were very skeptical about President Putin and Russia. Giuliani, of course, was outspoken in terms of defending NATO, claiming that NATO should be a very strong military and political organization, that the United States Army should be as strong as it was under Reagan, etc., etc. And I have to say that that's precisely why Giuliani was actually kicked out of the race. By now, as we know, Romney officially is not thrown away yet, but I'm sure he has no chances to become Secretary of State. And indeed now we are talking about Rex Tillerson, who is well known as a quote-unquote friend of Putin, who is a person who received medal from Putin, who is a person who is financially involved and very interested in Russian oil businesses, and by all opinions of both Democrats and Republicans, he is extremely pro-Russian. And then, of course, we are discussing another person who is extremely pro-Russian as well, Mr. Bolton, who might be his deputy. So what we are watching is the surrender of the United States in front of Putin, with a possible prize which Putin will get in a form of Eastern Europe, which will be given to Russia under Russia's control, in exchange for probably an open conflict with China. Now, I'm I'm not a great fan of China. China, of course, is a communist dictatorship, similar to the Soviet Union prior to 1991. It's an aggressive country. It's built an artificial island in the South Chinese Sea. In the recent Pentagon memorandum which Pentagon releases from time to time about strategic enemies of the United States. 3 are named: ISIS, Russia, and China. So China is the enemy of the United States. But what's happening now, I'm afraid, that Trump is trying to surrender as much as possible to Russia in exchange for having Russia as an ally in fighting against ISIS and against China. And if the fight against ISIS could be accepted by common sense, because ISIS, of course, is a common enemy for both Russia and the United States, then the idea of using Russia in a future American-Chinese conflict, I think, is both dangerous and damaging for the United States. And this actually puzzles me a lot. I'm afraid that one of the reasons why Trump is naming so many generals into his cabinet is because he understands that it's going to be much easier for him to give orders to generals and not to civilians. And
could it be also because he plans to go to wars?
Right, and also because he's preparing Americans for a military conflict with China. This is, I think, is a very dangerous road.
Very interesting. We're speaking with Yuri Felshtinsky, a prominent author, historian, and journalist. You're listening to Rashkin Report on WSUW 91.7 FM, Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Yuri Rashkin. Yuri, I have so many questions based on what you just said. I will just kind of hit them quickly, but one at a time. So do you feel that Russian services, my understanding has been that they have the intent to influence. They have intent to get this outcome. They would try to. But do you feel that they have the ability to influence the elections? When we're looking at, electors who are now supposedly Democratic elections are now demanding to see this security report from CIA before they vote. Do you feel that Russia had the ability to influence the elections, and what does that mean?
Well, I think we have to separate facts from the results. The fact is that Russia was trying to help Mr. Trump to become president by all means. And
which would include what?
Which would include some, legal means, like Russian media, both in Russia, in Russian, and in English abroad, and illegal means, like, breaking into computer systems of the Democratic Party of the United States of America. This, of course, is illegal. So,
but not necessarily. You don't think like tampering with elections and election machines, voting machines.
Well, this we do not know. This we do not know. Again, there are some people who suspect that this.
What are the chances of that even being possible? Is this something that do you think has been attempted in the past? Are you aware of any instances like this where attempts were made?
Well, unfortunately, my ability to make a conclusion as an expert in relation to computers is literally close to zero. I'm the wrong person to ask this question. I do not know whether this is possible. I know that in Russia itself, several years ago, the central computer which counts electoral votes in Russia was placed officially under the FSB control. And it's the FSB which counts votes in Russia. But this is in Russia. I know that there are reports both in Britain and in Germany that Russia is trying to influence elections there. So, not speaking about some small countries which do have elections in Europe from time to time as well, and which might have similar problems. In other words, if Russia managed to create a tool to influence elections, and this tool would include breaking into servers of political quote-unquote enemies and using releasing of materials from those servers into public prior to election with the goal to influence elections. This tool, of course, is very powerful. Now, the question is, how powerful is this tool, and whether this tool is able to change the results. This, unfortunately, we will never know. There is no way for us to calculate how many votes Clinton lost because of the activity of the Russian government. This question will never be answered, right? So we have to leave it behind. We have to leave it further. But what's troubling, of course, that Trump feels very insecure, and even now, and he is, of course, afraid that if he recognizes the fact that the Russian government was intervening on his behalf, then people would ask a question whether he might be considered illegitimate candidate, and whether, some other steps should be taken. That's what he's afraid of, right? This is too far. We probably will never go that far. We are not talking about new elections. We are not talking about not recognizing Trump's victory as a victory. We are not talking about replacing Trump with somebody else. We are not talking about this. All we are talking about is the understanding and the recognition of the fact that Russia was behind those attacks on computers of the Democratic Party, and Russia was trying to influence elections. At this point, that's all we would like to understand and to know.
All right. So it seems like a crime with no punishment.
Crime with no punishment, except for the fact that, unfortunately, I would say we know the answer to the next question. The next question is whether there is a chance that Trump did not know about the activity of the Russian government. The next question is whether Trump was not informed in advance about the activity of the Russian government, or whether he was informed in advance. And this, of course, we would be able to know after we see what the policy of President Trump is going to be after 20th of January. So far, through the naming of those people like Flynn or Tillerson, Bolton, etc., I would say he is kind of forcing us to come to a conclusion that Putin was doing him a favor, and now Trump is returning this favor in a form of taking pro-Russian politicians into his cabinet. There are not too many pro-Russian politicians in the United States. Trump literally has difficulties to find them. That's why we still do not know who is going to be our Secretary of State. But if this Secretary of State is going to be Mr. Tillerson, if his deputy is going to be Mr. Bolton, who are, from what they're saying now and from what they were doing before, indicated to us that they are very pro-Russian on the level of being Russian agents, whether they are agents of influence or agents, this we would never know probably, but their behavior is very suspicious. And this is going to stay with Trump. If they are within his administration, this is going to stay with Trump forever, if everything is peaceful and quiet. And if everything is not peaceful and quiet, then unfortunately we are going to face even more dangerous situation.
You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. My guest is Yuri Felshtinsky, prominent author, historian, and journalist, an expert on Russia and the former Soviet Union. Yuri, here's what I'm trying to kind of put together, because on one hand, I see that Putin is like in this kind of a metaphor that I have, I guess, in my mind, is he's like Aladdin who captures the lamp, and the lamp is the power of the United States. And he rubs the lamp, and now this genie is his. And so my first question is, what would he ask this genie to do? And then a second, kind of maybe a flip side, there's this confusion about CIA and why they released the report and all of this report. Is this really because they want to go to war with Russia? Do you feel that Russia wants to go to war with the United States? And how does all of this, who's going to be fighting who in this brave new world where Putin is controlling the American might through his appointees? And I don't know, I mean, to what extent do you feel this control can actually be real? Or is this something that maybe the Congress would, do you feel it should step up and do something? So your thoughts?
Well, both, of course, Senate and Congress are under the Republican control. At the same time, we know quite well that Mr. Trump is not a Republican. So there are a lot of people in Senate and in Congress who do not like him and who do not trust him. So he might face some opposition within Senate and Congress if he tries to appoint people who are obviously, for the majority of Senate and Congress, are not going to be serving interests of the United States of America. We do know, speaking about your question, what we should expect about Putin, or what Putin should expect.
Well, those are two different things, because what Putin expects is what we're going to do. But what are we? If he found this genie in the lamp, what will he ask it to do?
Well, I think we know what he's going to ask to do. He's going to ask for cancellation of sanctions. He's going to ask for recognition of annexation of Crimea. He's going to ask for recognition of the annexation of occupation, with further annexation probably of eastern Ukrainian regions, which are now under Russian control. But then, unfortunately, it's not going to stop there. And this is a major problem, because we do know, of course, that Russia is very interested in Belarus. There is a lot of activity around Belarus now. The schedule of transportation of Russian troops for Belarus for 2017 was released, and it's huge. Russia is planning to move troops into Belarus. I think the security and independence of Ukraine, once again, is going to be under great question. I think the fate of areas like Pridnestrovia. This is a portion of Moldova, which is under Russian occupation for many years now. Will be changed. I think Georgia once again might be at risk. I think all of those territories are part of NATO, but the fate of the Baltic states might be in question. So we might face a completely different world by the end of 2000 or 2001, by the end of the first term of the President Trump administration. So this might be a different world. And at the same time, what we know now, if this is going to happen, Trump will try to renegotiate trade relations with China. In order to do this, he probably would try to press China with a change in American foreign policy towards China. This may backfire. This may lead to the conflict between China and the United States. Russia, of course, is going to be the only winner in this conflict because Russia is not going to support the United States, and Russia will never fight against China. At the same time, it's kind of naive to think that Russia might be an ally of the United States in case of the American-Chinese conflict, because basically Russia has no fleet, and the Russian army, of course, is even now comparatively weak. It might be good and might be used against states like Ukraine, but it's definitely not going to be used and useful in case of conflict with China. So the whole idea of having Russia as an ally in a fight against ISIS and in this probable or potential fight against China is ridiculous.
But ISIS, yes, China, no.
Well, even with ISIS, you see, ISIS, yes, meaning that it's obviously an enemy. It is true. If you ask Russians, if you ask Putin whether ISIS is an enemy, yes, of course, ISIS is an enemy. But even here, and we see through the conflict in Syria, Russia is not actually helping with their involvement into Syria, because you see, Americans and Russians, or American government and the Russian government, I should say, have very different goals. Russia is intervening with a goal to be sure that the war in Syria will never end. Americans are intervening with the goal to end the war as quickly as possible. And this is going to happen every time Russia would intervene. Russia itself is not a peaceful country and never was. And if you look at the conflicts of 20th century, you will see that there is barely a country from which Russia did not take a piece of land. I guess there is just one country around Russia from which Russia never took land. So the rest of neighbors were always losing territory to Russia. So Russia is an aggressive country, and to think that Russia might be a reliable ally in a conflict, even with ISIS, I think it's very naive. Russia has its own interests, which unfortunately usually are in contradiction to the interests of the United States. And to think that Russia is an ally, I think is a mistake. Russia is an enemy.
Yuri Felshtinsky, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your vision for this definitely complicated situation with the listeners of Rashkin Report.
Thank you.
You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report.